Funding for The Router Workshop is provided in part by Hitachi Power Tools, manufacturers of a full range of construction and woodworking power tools. A vintage fern stand provided the inspiration for our next project in the Router Workshop. Bob and Rick show you how to use your router station to create an interesting piece of furniture. The delicately tapered legs are set at an angle to provide strength, and the feet are cross-lapped to provide stability. As beautiful as it is functional, the Rosendahl fern stand. Up next, right here in the Router Workshop.
Today we're going to go ahead and make a fern stand. And Dad, you're going to start. You can tell us what you're going to do?
We've got the column to make, Rick, and it's got a 3/4 inch groove down here on this one board in the center, and it lays into two pieces. However, you've got to taper them after I'm done. Can't taper them before I do them.
Right.
Then we get down to the bottom in here, and I got to make a cross lap on those two.
Right.
Plus, we're going to put the slope on the feet.
All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish rounding off those edges. We're going to show you a neat way to lay out 8-sided top and cut it. Let's get started.
I'm away. Now, what we need to do in here is chuck up a bit. And I mentioned we're going to use a 3/4 inch slot in there. I've got to cut a groove 3/4 of an inch wide and 1/4 inch deep. So that's the cutter. We'll put it inside of here, and we get my wrenches out and tighten it up. And this time you'll notice in here that we didn't put an insert in because the cutter's too large, but if we don't have a lot of space around it. So maybe before I pop this down in here, I'm going to set the depth a bit. You can see it a little better. And I'll use my brass setup bars. And the brass setup bars, when we get it in here, we'll just tap that back in here till it comes flush. And that's the depth. Remember, the piece I'm using is 3/4 inch thick. So if I put a groove on each side 1/4 inch deep, it'll leave us 1/4 inch in between the middle. We need that for support also. Now, we also need is a fence on here. So we'll pop that in here. We need something straight to run to, and we need a couple of clamps. We'll just clamp one end of it because I'm going to get my piece here first. And one of the things we have to do with this piece that I have in it, and I'm going to let Rick do a little sorting here. We got a knot, but I think it'll cut out of there when he gets the taper on it. We've got to find center. Take my self-centering pencil here and I'll center that. What I'm doing is really just guessing at this, people, but every router bit should have or will have a center end point in it. So I marked what I thought was center. You could measure this and be there forever. I could use my rubber rule, I guess. But we'll just set it on here where I think is center. And that does look kind of chintzy, but let me just show you what I do after. We'll tighten this clamp on. Now, I just check it again, and I'm on here. Now we'll take the stick and we'll turn it around and put it on the other side. And if there's any variation, we got your fine adjusting tool here. And by this case in here, I just have to tap that little bit in it, and we're right on. And we're away. Now, we got the groove on both sides, one on that side, one on there, and you can see in between here we end up with about 1/4 inch. That's just to hold those uprights in place. Let's lay that aside, and I'm going to have to make a bit change here again. This time we're going to put a 1/2 inch bit in. The 1/2 inch bit is a straight cutter, and I'm going to make the half lap in those legs. So pop the router out there. That's kind of handy. You don't have to reach down under. Take these wrenches and set it up, and we'll make a bit change. Now, again, the cutter's the same as this one, other than it's only a 1/2 inch in diameter. We'll set that into place. You can see that if you wish in here. Exactly 1/2 inch across, same style of cutter. Maybe a little shorter cutting edge on it because of its width. And we'll tighten that down. Now, I'm going to put that brass insert in this time too. Take that down, and I need a ring nut. And we need the insert. And we'll set it in here. When I get the ring nut on it, I'll let you have a look at what I did. We'll set that down. Pop that bit up. You can have just a look at what I've got in it. See the little clearance in here, and that's always a must, is to keep it as close as you can. Now remember, you don't get it too tight or it would spin it out. You got to have clearance for it. Now, got that all set up in here. We're going to need a fence again. This time, kind of unique in here because we got a real good setup in it. Here's what's going to be. I'm going to run this through here. If I was just to run that through and I could use a backer stick, what happens to that router bit when it rotates, it comes around, and when it comes in contact with the wood, then it pushes it away and you get tear out in the front. And when I go through the backside, we'll get tear out on the back. So we've developed a neat fixture here. It's a little box, a very simple box. And we'll just slip that piece down in the box, and we'll flush it up at this far end in it, like that. Flush that up. Now we can run this through. So really what I'm setting up here to do is to hold that box, and that gives me the distance. Now, we'll get our clamps on here, and we'll tighten that fence down into place. And again, the fence can be whatever as long as you line it up there. I'm going to rotate that cutter so I can see it. And we just take and set that just about like that. And we'll get this clamp on side of it. One more thing I've got to do. We don't want this to come loose in it, so I'm going to place a clamp also on it. So we'll take one of these clamps and we're just going to lock it across the box. What that does is squeeze those two sides down tight in there and keeps that piece from rattling around in it. And maybe our fine adjusting tool here just a bit. Isn't that neat? What about the height? Well, we need it halfway on that, so we're going to put it up in that box. We set a height on the box. And what it is the height of my bit has got to be whatever the half the thickness is. Make sure you don't try to get it too tight, otherwise one's going to stick above the other. If you're down a little bit below it, that'll give you room there to work off of anyway. Now this is a pretty tough cut to do inside of here, so we can't feed too fast, but remember, two things happen when you cut anything. You've got the rotation, the speed of the bit, and the speed of the feed, and that's what you're in charge. Now we'll get some power in here. And we'll cut this. I'm going to turn that up in here. That old walnut really comes off of there. If you look on the back side, you see my box, how it's chipped out? Now, the trick of this is to take this apart, and let's see what kind of a clean job we got on the part. See how nice and clean that's on the in feed and that's on the out feed? We got it very clean in it. Now, remember I had that end in. Now all I've got to do is reverse those pieces. And when I reverse those, that was the way we had it. We reverse it, we get the second cut. This is a kind of a three-cut operation because we're going to end up with a piece in the middle. But that'll clean out easy. Now we're away. Let's try it again. Well, maybe you want to have a look at that too. There's the piece in the middle. Now all I'm going to do is just adjust that, and I'll pull that away. And I'll pull that away like that, and then we'll put that back in and cut the center out. Always do the center cut last. That way you end up with clean shoulders on it. Now, there's how they fit together. And they fit nice and snug down in it. And we can lay the other one upside down, or you bring them inside, and that's how you get your fit. Now, what I need to do is taper these. So we're going to set those both aside here. I'm just going to drop that bit down, and I will unplug it. We'll take the fence down, and this time we'll go to another neat little fixture. These are all shop-made fixtures, people. There's nothing complicated about them. Just think a little bit when you build them as to the little job that you might have to do. And I'll set that up like that. And then I'll clamp it on here, and then I'll tell you what I've got. Maybe I'll just leave that clamp for a second here. I want to slide this piece in. See, this is a little tricky part. One of them goes in from the top, one from the bottom side. So one of them we have to mill with the groove up, and the other one we'll mill with the groove down. Don't forget that, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. Now I've fixed this little fixture in here, and it's got a taper on it. And the taper along the side, that's the taper we're cutting. So the bit that I'm going to use is going to keep right on that plane, and it'll just smooth that right off. At the end, you'll see a little bump end in here where it goes up to bumper stop so you know where your length is. And we'll just set it up. The clamp's going to come in from the back side. It's not only going to hold the fixture down, it'll hold this block from moving as well. So we got that set up in here. Don't forget to tighten that clamp so it doesn't twist around, but there isn't a lot of pressure on it. Let's look at the router and the bit at the same time. See the little sticks that I've got on here? They're only double stick taped onto your base plate, and they're little runners. And the reason for the runners is so we can get above the piece that we have to cut off. The bit then extends down, and how you set your depth, and if I turn it around I can show you here, you set the depth down, you run the bit down till it touches the fixture, lock it, then you can lower your depth gauge if you wish. I don't think you'll have any trouble taking it in one pass, and when I say one pass, that is one depth set. The reason is that I'm not going to take that in one cut. I'm going to come in here and take little pieces at a time out, and you'll see me seesawing back and forth, and then I'll take the router off, and you can see what kind of a job we ended up with. It takes very little sanding when you're done. So just lift the router up like that and make sure it's in the off position, and you'll notice also that I've got the springs in this time. Let's take this apart in here. I'm going to get this router plugged up, see if we can get some power, and it is in the off position. You should see how that spins around. You plug it in, then you can't find the plug to unplug it. Boy, I'll tell you, chase your router around the workshop. Now, see if I'm just flush there. Yeah, that's satisfactory. Okay, let's do it. All right. Now we got a nice smooth edge on that one. We'll turn it around and we'll put the other end in. Box is tight. Put that on, lock it in, and same procedure. Now we'll take this off. Now let's see what we got here. Well, they fit together in it. We got our slope on them. We'll check on Rick and see what he's got going there.
All right, we got the pattern all set up here for the 8-sided top of the fern stand now. Now all we need to do is go ahead and get the tapers done on the other pieces. Because I'm set up exactly the same way, all we're doing is following the guide and fixture. I'm going to do these two operations at the same time and then mold them later. So I'll set the top down.
So Rick, here's the pieces.
Great, we got the feet and this column here. The next operation is to go ahead and taper the column. Now, Dad's already run the groove in the piece, so all we need to do is get the fixture that'll do the tapering. We'll move this fixture out of the way that's done our top, and let's bring in the tapering fixture that we've picked out here. All right. This fixture here has got a narrower side on the top of the column and a little wider for the bottom part of the column. And the other thing that's unique about it is we have a couple of pieces double stick taped in the middle so that when we have this center column, we can line it up even for both sides. All right, so let's try and get our first one in here. Lock it down tight. Now what happens is the bottom pattern here follows along the guide, and the flush trim bit will clean it off and make our taper match perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and start it up and cut the pieces. If you look closely at this fixture, you're able to start on the end before you get into any wood, and you're able to get off the tool without having the wood as well. So you don't need a safety guide pin to work with it. It basically works for us. And let's see now. We've got all our tapered pieces here now. Let's see how they fit. And they all tie together here nicely now. So our column is looking good. All we have left to do now is the cove parts. And we'll go ahead and set these aside. I'm going to have to change the bit for that. And we'll do all the cove parts first. No longer do I need this fixture here, so we'll set it aside. We're going to unplug our tool, bring up the router. And the bit I'm going to put in here is a 5/32 Roman OG bit now. And we'll get this thing rolled around here so we can undo the bit. And we'll remove the flush trim. Here's the bit we're going to use today. We're going to use the 5/32 Roman OG bit. And to start with, all I'm going to do is use the top part of the tool. The last cut, which will be on the top of the tabletop part, is I'll use the full piece. So we'll load this in place. We've got to remove our guide. So we'll get this tightened in first, and then we'll take out the guide. And let's take out the guide here now. We no longer need the guide system now because all we're using is the piloted bearing, which has got all the pieces have been tapered or sized already, so we don't need to use this. We'll drop it in. I like to set the height up here, so I'll raise up the height and then I'll show you what I've got. We've got our bit set up here, so we just have the cove part of the tool showing. Drop it back down in place here now. And I'm going to go ahead and use a safety guide pin, if I've got one right here, and we'll put it in the place because the smaller part, we have to get to the guide, or get to the bearing first, and we've got a moving cutter there. So let's bring out some of the smaller pieces here, or the first one. Another thing I'd like to do here, and a good idea, is to go ahead and mark the edges. So if you sub-assemble this a little bit so you can make sure that you mark the pieces that you do need to round, and you don't end up rounding the ones that go on the inside. You don't want that to happen, so we'll just mark all the edges here so I can see what I'm doing. There, now I just need to look for the X, and I know where I have to go ahead and mold them. We don't want to mold the inside piece. All right, so we'll set these aside here now, and let's go ahead and mold the pieces. Oops, need to have some power. And there we go. Thought of one more thing. You guys might want to see this, so I'm going to move it over so you can see it. I'll just move my router around. There we go. And let you folks see it as well. Now that I've got all the cove operations done, this one here is done on the bottom part of the top. All I need now to do is to raise the bit and just get the whole profile of the cutter, and we'll finish off the top. So we'll raise that up so we've got a little bit of a profile line on that, lock that back up, and I'll finish the last part of the molding.
Now it's time for Tips from the Workshop, Viewer Mail, and Tricks of the Trade on Router Bits, Tips, and Wood Chips.
Our tip for today is making sure that your router bit's going in the right direction so that you don't get chip out like this. Here's what happened on this piece here. When I loaded it into the fixture, we moved the cutter in this direction, and what happened is we went into the grain or across the grain. And what you see the grain going in this direction here? If the router bit's going down on that, it's going to chip it out just like this. To prevent that, what we make sure that we do, if you look at the fixture, I can show you how we're loading it so that we make sure that we're going across the grain or with the grain when we're making the cut. So we'll flip it back over on this side. This here is the grain going in this direction here. If the router bit's moving down here, what's it going to do in the corner? It's going to chip out. So what we want to make sure we do is, if we flip it around in this direction here now, and now the grain is going in this direction here, it's going with the cutter so that when it comes down there, it can't chip out. You get a nice clean cut every time. Well, I got all the pieces here rounded. Here, I'll let you hold that top here. We'll start off maybe with the column.
Pretty slick.
And we're going to slide these pieces into that groove that you've made. And slide that in place. That looks pretty good. Flip it over and roll on the other side. Let's show the folks how we're doing that. Get it all together, and that's a quick
I'll
column.
hold that.
You hold that? I've got the two base pieces here. Remember that cross lap that you've done? I've just finished off all the grooves. This piece just slides together. We'll set that down in place.
I'm going to give you that.
I'll hold the top.
And I'll hold this piece.
Now all we have to do is make sure we got that flush and screw it down in place and put the top on. And I think we've got our fern stand done. Remember, folks, great ideas don't work till you do, so get your router out of the box and get it to work, and we'll see you next time right here on the Router Workshop.
We'd like to hear from you. You can email us at the address on your screen. Send your comments, questions, or project ideas to the Router Workshop, Post Office Box 608, Chamberlain, South Dakota 57325. Or in Canada, the Router Workshop, Post Office Box 280, Ely, Manitoba, ROH-OHO. To learn more about the Router Workshop, visit us at the internet address on your screen. Next time here in the Router Workshop, we begin a two-part series, building a hall mirror and table. We'll show you how to cope the rails, bead the stiles, and create the top and bottom moldings. Learn the secrets of cutting the rabbet in the back to accept the mirror. A challenge to build. The hall mirror and table project starts next time, right here in the Router Workshop. Funding for The Router Workshop is provided in part by Hitachi Power Tools, manufacturers of a full range of construction and woodworking power tools. For $16.99 plus $4.99 shipping and handling, you can order Bob and Rick Rosenthal's The Router, a 130-page book which includes a plan to build the router table and bench, plus numerous tips, techniques, and educational information. Call 1-800-803-1449.